video and probably the last one unless it goes really long. So we now have two different files here. One is my artwork file that I cleaned up. The other one is the dress file, or the garment, or the application sketch file. So it's at the right scale. I'm going to just get rid of the layer that has a scale on it because I don't need it. It's at the right scale. It now is going to be prepared to be turned into an application sketch. So I'm going to do the simple version of that, and then maybe the fourth video will be the slightly more complicated version if you want to be able to angle things. So the simple version would be select all, new layer via cut. So I've cut it off the background, which is really important so that I can actually put things behind it. You're going to see why. And then I'm going to select the garment. The garment, not the hanger. I'll probably end up selecting the necklace here, or the hardware, because it's there and it's not worth removing right now. But basically, I'm going to use the quick selection tool, and you can see the brush size is very small, so I'm using the larger brush size. There's a slider here, or you can always use the bracket keys on your keyboard to go bigger and smaller. And I'm basically just running it over the garment. I know because there's things in the background that are a similar color, especially down here, that it's not going to select the garment perfectly, and I'm going to have to refine it. And that's fine. I'll go in and like hand correct some of these things. It's not worth it for me going back and forth with the quick selection tool. So here I'm just going to go in the corner. I'm going to switch to the lasso tool. And using the option key on the keyboard, you can see it gave me the minus sign. When I'm drawing now with the lasso tool, it's actually going to cut away instead of add to the selection. So a rule about the selection tools in Photoshop: option key subtracts, shift key adds. So I took too much away here, so now I'm going to use the shift key. Now I'm going to use the option key to keep subtracting the wall from my selection. And there we go. And I think if I use the hand here, which is H on the keyboard, or going to the hand tool here, I can move up here, go back to my lasso, add in areas that the quick selection missed. Cuff ears, and option key, subtract things that should not have been selected. I'm not going to do an amazing job here just because it will end up being a super long video, but you can also use the magnetic lasso if you're more comfortable with that. I wouldn't bother using the quick selection or the magic wand. It's easier to do it by hand. It's almost like cutting something out with scissors and then going in and refining it with like an X-Acto knife. So I'm not even going to bother over here because nobody will notice that. And then the collar, shift key to add. And that should do it. So now that I've selected the actual garment, I'm considering this from here on out the shadow layer. You're going to see why in a second. So I'm going to say new layer via cut. Now I'm going to call it shadow layer. I'll call this the photo layer. So with the shadow layer, if I keep the color that it is now, it's going to cast like a yellowish tint on everything. And I don't want a yellowish tint on anything. I want a neutral layer. So I'm going to make sure I'm on the shadow layer, go to adjustments and desaturate it so it's grayscale. And then I'm going to adjust the levels so that it feels like a little higher contrast, not crazy, but a little darker where it's dark and a little lighter where it's light, so that it looks like this extreme shadow. And the last thing I'm going to do is go to the shadow layer menu and change it to multiply instead of regular, because regular is going to block out the background, but multiply is going to fall on the background. So I'm grabbing this now, select all, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go to the other file and paste it. Not, I hit the wrong thing. Edit, paste. Okay. So now I have the artwork here on its own layer. Obviously it doesn't look like it's in the dress yet, but if I change the layer order and put it all the way at the back, you'll see that it looks like it's the garment pattern now, and it's at the correct scale, and it's got this shadow layer on top of it that makes it a little bit more convincing that it actually is a dress, as opposed to having no shadow layer, which would make it look like a flat piece of cardboard. So the shadow layer is the key to making it look like an actual garment. I will acknowledge also that this fabric it doesn't look like the original because the color is so washed out. That's because the photo was really washed out. So if you want to adjust it, you can still do that in this form. So image adjustment levels for the pattern layer, just to give it a little bit more darkness. And if I think it looks too red, I can go to adjust the hue saturation and do things like drop out the saturation or change the hue so it's reading more green black instead of red black. But again, this is just for a mock-up to figure out if you like the scale and the pattern. So I think this looks pretty good. I'm probably going to make another video on how to make it so that the fabric looks like it was actually cut. But I just want to note that while I'm in here, I have the original pattern. If I'm using this to generate new ideas, I could make a new layer and do something like change the scale. I'm sorry, I meant to duplicate it. Duplicate this layer and change the scales if I was wondering what this design would look like at a smaller scale. So I'm going to take the original away for a second and just sort of mock up. And use the eraser so I can pretend it's an actual pattern. Sort of mock up what it would look like at a smaller scale. This doesn't have to be a presentation tool. It can just be a generate an idea tool. Oops. And I'll leave it there. You can also bring in drawings, you can bring in ideas, sketches, and figure out like what kind of a pattern you're actually trying to develop, and then use this as a template for developing your actual pattern. All right, ending there, doing one more video on a more complicated application sketch. And I might even add in like a chair.